In this video, I will address the question of why members of racial minorities in the United States who have socially conservative views nonetheless vote Democrat rather than Republican. As with all such questions, it's important to point out that not all do. Some don't vote, some vote Republican. But there is definitely a phenomenon where if a person is white and socially conservative in the United States, you can generally expect that they will vote Republican, but the same is not true of a person who is black and socially conservative. I should point out that this is an outsider's view, as you can probably tell from my voice. I'm Australian. This is not presented or intended to be in any sense a result of my experience as a black American, because I am not black or American. So, for what it's worth, after John McCain lost to Barack Obama, the Republican Party commissioned a report, which they eventually called the Growth and Opportunity Project, to look at why they lost. The report, which I will link to in the description of this video, stated that, quote, many minorities wrongly think that Republicans do not like them or want them in the country, unquote. This report suggested, without using these exact words, that the Republican Party had to abandon the role that it currently occupied and which it began to take in the 1960s, which was that of the party of opposition to civil rights, broadly speaking. With the nomination and election of Donald Trump, the party has, of course, taken a different trajectory to that of the Growth and Opportunity Report. And in fact, in my personal view, I think the nomination of Donald Trump was probably a reaction to, if not the report specifically, certainly it was a reaction by the Republican base. I believe that a lot of the Republican base didn't want the party to be repositioned on racial issues, and they found a champion in Donald Trump, and that's how he got nominated. So the answer to the question, I believe, is that people who are in racial minorities but socially conservative often vote Democrat because they perceive the Republican Party, perhaps particularly after the nomination of Donald Trump, as being hostile to them as such, regardless of their social views or regardless of their views on anything. In order to address a couple of objections, I want to say a few things. Firstly, I would say this is not my explanation or the Liberal explanation. This is the explanation that Republicans came up with. This is the explanation that was the official Republican Party explanation, in as much as they had an official explanation, albeit, of course, I think now they have rejected it, and I doubt very much that the Republican Party would stand by the Growth and Opportunity Project report. But at one time, this was what Republicans were saying they had to do in order to be electable. So if anyone's saying, "Oh well, that's just left-wing propaganda, or that's just a left-wing distortion," well, no, it isn't. It's a Republican view of the world. It might be wrong, but it's not a left-wing mistake. If it is a mistake, it's a Republican mistake. I also think it's instructive, possibly, to look at a couple of responses that I've received online, having expressed this view, on a site called Quora.com, Quora.com, which I'm fairly active on. The first one said that, quote, the Democrats know that they can organise immigrants and other relative low-income people to vote for more government benefits. As soon as they bootstrap up and are no longer as dependent on such organised voting efforts, they reject overspending and increase tax burdens that take away the fruits of their bootstrapping, unquote. That is, the claim seems to be that minorities tend to vote Democrat when they're the poorest, and then as they get more established, they stop voting Democrat. This is not true. Jewish Americans are an obvious example of an established minority. Most Jewish Americans, their family has been in the United States for a very long time, and there is very little Jewish immigration to the United States, or relatively little, certainly not nearly as much as there was in other periods, such as in the late 19th century. and 71% of Jewish American votes went to Hillary Clinton in 2016. I'm afraid I don't have figures for the last election, but certainly I think it's generally accepted that Jewish Americans tend to vote Democrat, and Jewish Americans are an established minority, if anyone is an established minority in the United States. The second response stated that, quote, the Democrats own the propaganda machines, the media, Hollywood, and academia, unquote. I think this response somewhat misses the point, because why, if that were the case, and if that fact was effective, why would it make minorities in particular vote Democrat? Why wouldn't it make everyone vote Democrat? There doesn't seem to be any obvious reason why white people can see through this propaganda if it exists, whereas minorities can't, unless, of course, you're suggesting that members of minorities are uniquely gullible. And if you're suggesting that members of minorities are uniquely gullible, maybe the attitude you have towards minorities is the problem. Maybe it's not the propaganda. Maybe you shouldn't start from the proposition that white people are more insightful and clever than other people.